Thank you so much. Excited to be talking to everybody today in our last day of the conference, post-lunch, almost end of the event time slot. So thank you everybody for joining me today. As you've all mentioned, I'm the Senior Director for the Analytics Data Platform at Early Warning Services. Has anybody in here heard of Early Warning Services? Probably not. Well, Steve has. So the one thing that you've probably heard that we do is we're the owner and the operator of the peer-to-peer payment network Zelle. In addition to that, we do a tremendous amount of risk modeling for the banking industry. When you present a check for payment and they run it through a little scanner, we have the fraud models that determine whether that check is going to clear or not. We're owned by the top 7 banks in the United States, and we cover data from 75% of demand deposit accounts in the US. So demand deposit accounts, those are all the checking accounts, all the savings accounts, where you can actually walk into a bank, give them a slip, and get your money out fairly immediately. So we have a tremendous amount of sensitive data that we focus on, that we try and train our risk models on, and then deploy our risk models. But we know that models are very difficult to get over the finish line. And this is universal. It doesn't matter how good you think you are. Models are really, really hard to get into production. In Nick's presentation yesterday, you may have noticed a really interesting stat, because I wrote it down because it just kind of really aligns with this. I think it was 22% of companies that are new to data, AI, machine learning, data science, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. 22% of those new entrants can get models in production at scale. Not a whole lot, right? For entrenched players, that number was only 44%. Getting models into production is really, really difficult. So, there's been a lot of articles and think pieces about why big data science and data analytics projects fail. Here's a headline that I found. Gartner says 85% of big data projects fail. VentureBeat says 87%. That probably varies from organization to organization, but these are really, really difficult things to get over the finish line. When we're thinking about it, there's really 3 key design patterns that we use when we're productionalizing models. We have an MLOps platform, which is going to produce some type of API. Domino is a really great example of that, in addition to all the workbench and all the other goodness that Domino brings. Second model is batch scoring scripts, where the data scientist will whip up a Python, R, SAS, whatever kind of script, schedule a cron job and run it in the background and write those scores out to a static table. And those scores get used in a static way and they're not updating. And then the third key design pattern is integrating that into production IT environments, which tend to look like this, right? How many of you can feel some sense of understanding when you look at this picture and you think about your internal IT department, and how all the systems are structured, how all of them are put together? They tend to be little point solutions that get built over time. And over time, over 20 or 30 years, you tend to have infrastructure that looks like this. IT environments are very, very complex for a number of different reasons. One of the things that I like to say when I'm coming into a new role is I don't like to put a whole lot of judgment behind how we got to where we are. You can almost understand the decision-making process that got you each of those little components inside of that really complex IT environment. We have things like super rapid technological advancements, point solutions that are focused on very narrow use cases based off of some request from the business that IT has to get things done. Very, very complicated data integration and data management needs. There's always the interconnectedness and interdependence of all of these various systems, which gets even more complicated when they're legacy systems with years and years and years of technical debt built on top of it. There's always the scalability and performance demands, which is one key reason we look to productionalize models inside of an IT environment as opposed to just standing up an API and letting any consuming application hit it. What if your e-commerce platform is trying to hit that API and it's not hardened to the point where it is 5 nines reliability, which is where an e-commerce platform needs to be? There's always a very diverse vendor ecosystem. How many different vendors do we just use in the data space alone? Now multiply that out across all of the other domains that exist inside a highly complex company. And then the last thing I have here is the regulatory and security environment. Some companies are dealing with information that is so sensitive. If they had a data breach or a leak, it would actually spell doom for the company. So like I mentioned, we have data for 75% of demand deposit accounts in the US, and that basically means daily checking account activity for most Americans, which is pretty sensitive, and it would be pretty catastrophic if it leaked out. So because of that, we think very carefully about how we productionalize models. How do we even train the models using our production data that sometimes requires PII? The other thing to really think about IT environments is that they are very unique depending on the organization and the industry that you're in. There's never one set design pattern that you can follow. There's no one reference architecture that you can implement that will help you get from the very beginning of a data science project all the way to a deployed, scaled, monitored model running in production that is producing quality predictions at the very end. So what I'd like to do today is talk through some of the lessons that I've learned over doing this, really for the past 15 years in a number of different organizations. Some of them are highly regulated financial institutions, such as Freddie Mac, such as Early Warning, and then some of them were companies that really value customer data and put a huge emphasis on protecting it. So companies like Apple, companies like Gap, and all of these things were really, really similar in some of the lessons that I've learned in how to actually get these models over the finish line. So there's really 3 key components, 3 lessons that I've learned throughout my journey so far that help me get things done inside of these complicated environments. First thing, get professional help. And we'll dig into this a little bit. But really what this all comes down to is having the right people in place to orchestrate collaboration between teams and who can really own something end to end and ensure that this model gets into production. Second is round up your posse. There is a large group of people throughout the organization that you're going to need their help. You're going to need their guidance, their assistance, their approval, and their resources in order to productionalize models and get these out the door. And then the final component is failing to plan means planning to fail. It's very, very difficult for a data science organization to come in and say, hey, all of a sudden I need you to drop everything because we have to get this model into production because it's going to save the company, a couple $100 million, and this is going to be this. If you're coming into an organization and you haven't properly planned what those resources are, what those workflows need to be, it's going to be very difficult to get those projects over the finish line. Because think about it, data science and AI and ML, and again, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. It's a still fairly new discipline to most organizations, right? Some of the best ones might be 15, 20 years into it. Most of them are probably going to be 5 years. Not a whole lot of process, not a whole lot of policy set up to support data science, AI, machine learning initiatives. There's not a whole lot of existing patterns to help us move these models through. So now I'm going to talk about each one of these individually. And so the first one, get professional help. And very specifically, there's one role that has stood out to me over the last couple years that has been an absolute game changer in terms of being able to get projects done. And that is the data product manager. And data product manager is a fairly new discipline. I would say really started to come about probably the early to mid 2010s in the big tech companies, and then that starts to roll its way out into other organizations. Now, a data product manager is different from a product manager because they have an emphasis on creating value with data. And they work in conjunction with other product managers and other staff throughout the organization to help drive these projects to a successful completion. Our data product manager is really going to be the person that aligns the technological solution to the business strategy. Sometimes we think of them as business translators. Sometimes we think of them as requirements gatherers. And it's really kind of all of the above, but it's a single person that is responsible for the project end to end and lining up those resources. Data product managers, because of their background and training, are incredibly skilled at setting very clear project goals, milestones, deliverables, and success criteria. And this last one is really, really important. Success criteria. How are your development teams and delivery teams going to know that the project was done and that it was done properly? We want to identify that and define that up front so that all these technical teams have something to manage to and they understand what they're driving towards at the very end. Your data product manager is also going to manage your stakeholder and executive communications, ensuring that everybody is kept up to date throughout the entire journey about where the project is, what resources are needed to complete it, to maintain prioritization, not only amongst the teams that are working on it, but also amongst the executive teams that are ultimately expecting this project to be completed. And the data product manager can own the outcome end to end. And in a modern complex organization, there's usually not a whole lot of people that we look at in these projects to own it end to end. There's a lot of handoffs between teams. We start with an idea, it gets prioritized, we approve the resources, we put a data scientist or two on it, they start to do exploratory data analysis, starting to fit some models. There's a handoff sometimes with a data engineering team to build feature stores, to build pipelines. It gets handed back to the data scientists because the predictions aren't getting what they actually need. So there's a lot of iteration in there. And then we have to move it through into the IT organization. And this is where it becomes really useful to round up your posse and to curate a network of advocates and partners throughout the organization that are going to help you. And this is where soft skills are really, really important. You know, I think sometimes as data scientists, we think what we're working on is the most important thing to the organization and is really a game changer. And that's often true, but not everybody sees it that way. Not everybody understands what their role is and how they can help out. So creating partnerships in these key areas of engineering, architecture, information security, and privacy really help to move processes along. It allows you to better collaborate with these teams that have other work to do. But ultimately, we in the data science organization need their buy-in, need their support, and often need their explicit approval to be able to move forward. Building strong relationships with these partners pays dividends in the long run. And how you can do that is not coming to them when you need something, but taking the time up front to invest in that partnership. The other day, like I said, I've recently started a new role. I'm about 3 weeks in. I had a conversation with our chief architect the other day, and he's going to be, just an invaluable resource as I'm building out this new analytics data platform, machine learning operations, all of these components to help us, better productionalize models. And one of the key things that I asked him was, what's your goals for this year? What are you measured on, and how can I help you achieve those goals? And he's like, oh, that's a really great question. Nobody ever asked me that. And he talks about, well, one of my goals is to start a cloud transformation. Okay, well, how can I help you do that? Like, let me offer you something because I know I'm going to be coming in a couple of weeks and asking for something. So let's start to build that symbiotic relationship. The same thing goes with some of these other teams, particularly information security and privacy when you're in a regulated industry. Investing in building these relationships in advance, like I said, pays dividends because not only can you define process up front, you've got a relationship so that when you need to deviate from process, you've got a partner that you can work with to help you think through the implications and ultimately sign off on whatever you're trying to do. Another way of doing this is aligning KPIs and organizational goals throughout the company. For instance, if I have a KPI that says I need to deliver 5 risk models by the end of the year, and I'm the only one who has that goal is not anybody else's problem, it's not in anybody else's performance review, I'm not necessarily going to get the same level of support that I would if that was actually an organizational-wide goal or a shared goal between various teams. The other thing that I found when creating this network of advocates and partners throughout the organization is to really celebrate the achievements and acknowledge the contributions of each of the members of the team. In a team that I worked with previously, we had an organization where we had data engineers and we had data scientists very tightly integrated, working on some underwriting models for the life insurance industry. And one of the things that I constantly heard from the data engineers is that we keep getting asked for stuff. We keep delivering stuff. Everything is done on time and properly. We don't have to do a whole lot of rework, but we never get thanked for what we're doing. So we've got other teams that are contributing to our success, and we don't always take the time to acknowledge those contributions and say, hey, we are co-developing this model. We are co-developing these data pipelines. And those contributions, that acknowledgement of those contributions really do go a long way in developing partnerships that allow you to drive these projects forward. And then the last thing here is to foster open communications and context sharing. Why are we working on the projects that we're working on? Why are we working on this model? Why does it matter to the organization? And providing that business context of what goal we're trying to achieve and how it impacts the organization is absolutely massive. I remember there was this time I was at Apple, and this was, in the early days of, data science and analytics. We have this big old data warehouse that was mostly used for batch jobs for really advanced corporate BI types of projects. They weren't used to the types of ad hoc analytics and model building that data science does. And what we did is we sat down with the person that ran the data warehousing team and walked him through a series of analysis that we were doing. One that I was working on at the time had to do with returns. And he was just blown away by some of the things that we were doing with the data. And he came out of that conversation asking the key question: what can I do to help? And because of that, we were able to get additional resources. We were really able to line up all of the technological components that we needed in order to make our team successful while not building all of that infrastructure ourselves. So curating a network of advocates and partners, I consider to be one of the really key components, one of the key lessons that I've learned throughout my career in driving these projects to completion. So you think about a TV set or a movie set, and we've got the actor, we've got the hero, he's standing there in front of the gold curtain, the person on camera, but there's people behind the scenes. There's people behind the camera, there's people behind the backdrop that are helping to support this. Everybody plays a role in driving successful data science projects, getting models into production, and it's really important that we acknowledge what those contributions are across the organization. And the final lesson I want to talk about today is failing to plan and planning to fail. Everybody has seen this quote here, or I'm assuming everybody has seen this quote here on the left-hand side. Lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. I used to work with somebody who had a sign, that sign up in her office, and she would actually point to it when people would come in and try and interrupt what she was doing. And it's very much a true thing. There's only so many times you can come in and upset somebody's apple cart, change the course of their day, their week, their month, their quarter, because you've got a last minute request, a last minute thing that you're trying to get over the finish line that they haven't been a part of up until now. So being predictable and being a part of the planning process is really important to driving data science projects to completion and productionalizing those models. So some of what we talked about before is having clear project objectives and success criteria. Your data product manager is going to help with that. End-to-end resource allocation and management. So how does what project I'm working on, whatever risk model I'm trying to get over the finish line, how does that stack up with everything else that's in their queue? Every one of us that works in an office in a white collar job, we have more work to do than we have time. It's very rare that I've met someone, especially in the data science and analytics space, that doesn't have enough to do. We always have more projects than we can complete, more stuff that we need to get over the finish line that we don't have the resources to do. And that gets even worse once we start to extend that out to other partners. And so being a part of the planning process, making sure that all the resources are lined up, I'm going to be working on the model from this time to this time. On April 10th, we're going to turn the model over to data engineering. We need the resources lined up there. March or May 1st, we're going to need the model validation team to take over. We've got to go through risk review. And all of these components, actually having those timelines lined up and having those resources lined up really help drive projects over the completion line. Stakeholder alignment and communication. These projects can sometimes take a long time to complete, and therefore people will often forget that they're going on. And so constant communication about where the status of things are, how are resources being used, can we release resources, do we have things coming up that we didn't expect, are all key components of that planning process, and ensuring that we have the right team members available to us and able to get over the finish line. And so those are the three lessons that I have learned. When I've applied them, I've really been able to drive some successful outcomes in getting models over the finish line, building out ML, AI pipelines that help the teams be more productive, and ultimately get those projects generating value for the organization. So again, those three lessons: get professional help with your product managers. Sometimes there's other auxiliary types of roles that could be really, really helpful depending on how complicated and how resourced your organization is. But that data product manager, like I said, is an absolute game changer in terms of being able to get things done. Round up your posse, create that network inside of the organization, have advocates, have believers in what you're doing, and have them help you drive these to completion. And then failing to plan means you're planning to fail. And that's it. Would love to spend some time taking any questions or having any discussion.